Hi, in this video we're going to cover copying data from a SQL Server on a VM. We're going to use Azure Data Factory to make a connection to that SQL Server. We will then make a connection to an Azure SQL Database that we're going to create. I'm going to show you how to create an Azure SQL Database. That's a platform as a service database, so you're not managing the OS, you're not managing SQL Server versions. It's evergreen SQL. You don't have to worry about all the patching of that. So this Azure Data Factory job will connect to this SQL Server. It could be on-prem, it could be in the cloud, doesn't matter. It's connecting to that traditional SQL Server and then copying the data to another table in Azure SQL DB. And then we'll try and look at some more advanced transformations after that. So here we go. So let's start out in Azure. There is a, before we get to Azure, this is GitHub. I'll put a link to this. And this is a GitHub repository that walks you through how to do this. So if you click, I'll send you this link in the description. And if you go to Labs, Lab 0 is a setup. You don't have to do that. I already set up the VM for you. So we're going to start on Lab 1, set up Data Factory and create a connection. So when you click here, these are readme.markdown.md for Markdown. I have a lot of screenshots in here just to show you how to do all this. So I'm going to walk through this now. Let's go into Azure. It's portal.azure.com. And the first thing you're going to do is hit this little menu at the top left and create a new resource. So we're going to create a new data factory. Once again, data factory is similar to SSIS, but in the cloud. So it's serverless SSIS. So if you up here in the search the marketplace, just say data factory, you should get a drop down that says Data Factory. Click that, and you're going to see a screen like this, and then click Create. So next you're going to give it some names. You can really call it anything you want. ADF Kirby, something like that. Looks like it doesn't want underscores. And a resource group, you can if you have one already, you can put one in it or create a new one. A resource group is simply just a logical grouping of things, an easy way to keep track of things. So I'm just going to have a resource group called ADF. Location, let's pick West US. It really doesn't matter, whatever you prefer. I'm going to say West US 2 for this. Don't worry about enabling GitHub right now. So this is all you need. Just those fields right there, then click the Create button, and this will take a little while. Now, as this submits for deployment, and you'll see over in the top right, you'll see deployment in progress. Keep an eye on this bell here. If you somehow go to some other screen here in Azure and you're doing something else, you can always look up at this bell icon. This is your notifications. When you click on that, you're going to come here and see what's actually happening, and once your deployment is complete, you can just click the Go to Resource Deployment. So let's just, I'm going to pause the video and let that deploy. It should only take maybe a minute or two. Okay, so that was maybe just around 2 minutes. You'll see this screen up here changed. Let's just say you had gone away from this and you were over here. Let's just close notifications. If you were doing something else, once again in Azure, you just click the bell and you're going to see what happened. Looks like everything's good. A nice thing you can do is just say pin to dashboard. That way this resource, which is Azure Data Factory we just created, ends up on your main dashboard. So I'm just going to click Go to Resource. So we're now going to go to our Azure Data Factory. This is the first screen you're going to look at. You wouldn't spend a lot of time in this particular screen. What you typically do right away is click Author and Monitor. Click this link right here. You can look down here. It's going to give you some dashboards of different stats on the Data Factory. But let's click Author and Monitor. Then that's going to bring up this screen, and in just a couple of seconds, you're going to be brought to kind of the initial splash screen of Azure Data Factory. And that screen looks like this. So a lot of videos to help you, tutorials to help you get started. If you're new to Azure Data Factory, you can create a pipeline. A pipeline is just like a job. That's what we're going to do. We're going to set up a job using a wizard to copy data. You can configure it for GitHub or Azure DevOps repository alignment. But for right now, let's click this pencil icon over here. If you ever wanted to get back to this screen, you just click the Home button. But we're going to hit the pencil on the top left for authoring. The very first thing we're going to do, I told you we already had a VM running SQL Server with a simple database on it. So what we're going to do is go to the bottom left and click Connections. See this button right here? Click Connections. And we're going to set up a data source. That's kind of what it's called, a link service here, but in other languages, other program solutions, it's might be a data source. So let's click New on this. Now you're brought up with the screen, and this is a good screen because it kind of shows you all the different things. You can go to Amazon, you can go to DB2, Dynamics, Salesforce, Hive, Jira, MySQL, all sorts of options. And for this one, if you just type SQL at the top, it's going to filter it down a bit. What we want here, we're going to use SQL Server, plain old SQL Server. So we'll click that. Now what it's going to do, which kind of as expected, is prompt us for what the server name is. So I have an IP address. This is a VM that's publicly facing. And I'm going to give it a username here, which I'm going to pull over from my notepad, paste that, and then my password, super secret password. And then the last thing we're going to do is type in the name of the database. This is an existing database. Once again, we're just creating a connection string to our existing database, and I think it's called retail. So let's just put that there. Once you've done this, click the test connection bottom right, and it's going to test. And everything is good because you get a green check mark and it says connection successful. So just click create. So just to review, we've set up an Azure Data Factory and we've created one connection pointing to a SQL Server. Okay, so the next part would, let's go back over to GitHub, and we finished with this lab here. If you just click the labs link, we're moving on to lab 2 pretty quick. Now what we're going to do is set up an Azure SQL Database. This is our destination. This is our cloud database. Once again, this is platform as a service. You don't have to manage these things like you typically do with an on-premises or a VM, where you're worrying about all the bits and storage behind the scenes. A lot of that is handled for you by Microsoft. So let's do that. Let's go back to our Azure portal. Okay, so let's go back to our Azure portal. When you're back here and you said author monitor, it opened up a new tab. So just go back to that other tab or just go to portal.azure.com. And let's go back to our dashboard, our main dashboard. So what we're going to do is set up a database, Azure SQL Database. So click Create New Resource, and the category down here is Databases. You could just start typing here, but let's narrow it down a bit and see Databases. And what we want is SQL Database, aka Azure SQL Database. Once again, this is a platform as a service database. So let's click Database. There's a few screens here we're going to have to fill out, but it's pretty straightforward. Let me guide you through that. Okay, under the Basics tab, I'm just using my internal subscription. Pick whatever resource group you want. Once again, it's whatever you've created, or if you don't have one, just say Create New. It's just a logical container. It's a way to group things together. So I'm going to give it a name. Let's just call it SQL Copy. Now here's what you're going to have to do if this is the first time you've done this. You're going to create a new server. This actually isn't a server. We talked about not having to manage the bits and bytes on a server. This isn't an actual server. It's just it's a way to group databases. Once again, it's a logical way to group databases. You'll go to this server and it'll have many databases on it, but it's just it's a construct in Azure. So let's say Create New, so I can walk you through that. Over here, I won't bore you by typing all this in, but you can create a server name that has to be unique. It's going to be, let's just say, your server name, and then you just put that in here. So Kirby's SQL Server, and that looks like it's unique, so it's all checked out. And then you're going to give it an admin login and password, and then the location. Once again, I'm going to go to like West US 2 here. So I'm going to fill all this in, and then but I'll pause the video so you don't have to watch me do this. Okay, so I have my admin login and my password ready to go. Click OK here. So that fills that in here. Now I have my database name, my server. I don't want to use an elastic pool. That's fine. And here's a way to save money. Click Configure Database. And when you go here, you're going to see how much this is a month. This is, if this was left running the whole time, $380 a month. I'm going to go pick something that's more like $5 a month. So click up here under the basic, and now it's like $4.99, so just under $5. Just about a price of a cup of coffee. So I'm going to say apply here. So now I'm good to go. I've filled all these things in here. I got my database name, my server. I picked a really inexpensive one, and I can go to networking, but I don't really need to add anything here. So I'm just going to say review and create. Right now, it'll just run through a couple things. If you get this far, it's pretty promising, and then you just click create. If there's any problems with what you filled in, it's going to give you a little message up here, and then you go back and fix that. So let's let that deploy. Okay, our deployment is complete. You see the screen right here, and that took about, probably around 3 minutes. Click Go to Resource, and the first thing we're going to want to do, once again, we're in Azure, we've just created a database, and we're going to want to go and into the firewall right here, set server firewall. So what you want to do here is this is locked down by default. You want to add your client IP because you're going to be working on this, and then also say allow Azure services and resources to access this server. Since we're going to use Azure Data Factory, we want that, so we click that on. My IP is already added. Now I can say save. So we'll just click that. See, it's all been updated successfully, and now we are done with that lab. If we go right here to the lab and then go back, we are ready to proceed to lab 3. And this one is creating this destination table. So there's a SQL file right here, create person table. Let me show you how we do that. Okay, we could log into SQL Server Management Studio, connect to this database, and create the database that way. But instead, let's go grab the script right here in lab 3. Grab the SQL here. And we're going to log in directly from the Azure portal. So how do we do that? We're here in the database. You'll see Query Editor Preview in the left-hand menu, or blade as they call them in Azure. This blade here has this menu item called Query Editor. Type that in there, and then you'll be prompted to log in. Now, pro tip here, if you get a failure to log in here, it'll say, hey, this IP address isn't whitelisted on the firewall. So whatever that IP address that it's complaining about, go add that to the firewall like I showed you earlier. You just go to Overview and add that there. But here we are. We're in the server, right in the cloud. Nothing running locally on our laptop or server. So we're just going to run this query here. And it looks like it succeeded. So how do we know? Let's just double check. Yep, there's our person table. So what we've done, and this is a real simple, straightforward lab, we connected to the SQL Server in Azure that we created. We logged in to the query editor, and then we ran this data definition DDL file to create the person table. So that's the end of that lab. Now we're ready to create a connection to the destination so we can copy it from the source to the destination. So let's do that. So we can go back to Data Factory here. Remember this screen here, font is a little bit small, but you're back in Data Factory, you're under the Author tab here, and you're in the Connection section. We want to create another section. Remember we had created a connection or a data source pointing to our VM that had SQL Server on it. Now we're creating another, what they called link service, to Azure SQL Database. So if we just type SQL again, this time instead of SQL Server, we want Azure SQL Database. This is the platform as a service version of that. And since this is let's click the continue button. The nice thing about this one is that you pick your subscription here, and then you're going to be able to pick the server name. So remember, we had this one that we created earlier. It was called Kirby SQL Server, so we click that. It loads all these databases. SQL copy. Once again, this is where we're going to copy our data to. So we created this server in Azure. That's the database name. That's the server name, sorry, the database name, and we're going to use SQL Server authentication. So once again, whatever you used as your admin ID and password, let's put it here. Type in my password, click Test Connection. Down here, bottom right, make sure you hit the test connection. You're going to get a green checkbox if everything is good, and it says connection successful. So go ahead and click Create. And that is created. So we have our source, which is SQL Server. We have our destination, which is Azure SQL Database. Now we're ready to go set up what's called a pipeline. Let's go over here. A couple things I wanted to point out here in pipeline. You could click the ellipsis and say new folder. Just say test, copy. That's just a way to organize things. As you create more and more pipelines, aka jobs, they might be hard to keep track of unless you start putting them in folders. So just keep that in mind. You can create these folders by clicking the ellipses. All right, so we're ready to create. You typically would go in here, click this plus, and say, hey, I want a new pipeline. But I want to point out a couple things. When you click pipeline, this brings you to this canvas where you start dragging and dropping objects on here and start filling in values. But we can do it another way too, a couple different other ways. You can create a pipeline from a template. If you go to pipeline from a template, it's going to show you the template gallery. Yeah, so you have this full set of templates that you can start with. Delta copy from a database, only get the new rows. You just click on that, fill in a few fields, and you're off and running with your data flow. But for this one, what we're going to do, let's just close our template gallery and this pipeline that we had started. And we're going to click the little plus. And for this experience, just to make things quick and easy, but that we can modify it later, we're going to use copy data at the very bottom. That's a wizard that's going to walk you through copying this data from SQL on-prem to Azure. Now, it puts a default task name. This is no big deal now, but if you don't start naming these with something that's kind of intuitive or something you're going to remember, you'll look back at this in 24 hours and go, what was copy pipeline 9QS? So I'm just going to say copy SQL from on-prem to Azure. Yeah, you don't have to create a description here, but this is where you can set up a schedule if you want. You can run every 24 hours. I think the most frequent you can do is every 15 minutes. Start, end, delay, all that stuff, just like you would in a normal SQL Server agent job. But let's just say run once now. So now we click next. Now it's going to prompt you for some connections that we've already set up. These link services or data sources we already set up. It says, hey, what is your source? And remember we set up SQL Server 1. Say, hey, that is my source. So click next. Now, of course, it's going to go in and look at that source and say, well, what table do you want to copy? And it happens to be this person table. So you can click that. It's going to preview the schema down here in the bottom right. You can include views if you want, or you can do a custom query. Write your query right here. But that's the table we want, so let's click next. And we don't have to worry about that, so let's click next on this. Now it's going to say, what is our destination? We want it to go to Azure SQL Database. So we'll click next on that. Then, of course, it's going to say, well, where in this Azure SQL database do you want to copy it to? So if we click the drop down, you're going to see that one table that we created. Remember, we put that DDL, data definition language script out there. So that's where we want it to go to. And then it's going to go and do some mapping for us. Now, it's obviously the same table, same column, so it figured out the mapping automatically. You can even put in some custom coding here for some pre-copy script what you want it to do. You can create a new mapping, but I'm going to just leave the default here and say next. And now leave those the fault tolerance. You can have some options here to skip incompatible rows or abort on the first incompatible, and that's fine. We'll just leave it at that. And don't worry about the staging settings. Let's click next. Now it's all ready to go, so it's going to validate and then actually deploy. So this is a wizard. It made it easy to make this, but we can then take that. It actually creates a pipeline that we can edit and make some changes to, because of course you might want to add something that it's going to look at a certain date time column and only pull in the latest records. So what we can do here is click monitor, and that's going to bring us to the monitoring tab. And you can see that the job is running, job or pipeline. It's running, and the status is in progress. If you ever don't see what job or pipeline that you're running, if you don't see what you expect to see, check your filters, the top right here. You click on that, and it's going to show you that it's got, some filters set. You can clear those if you want. So just if you don't see what you're expecting to see, click the filters. Maybe there's some filter on it. So we're going to let that job run here for a few seconds. Okay, so as you can see, it took about a minute and 45 seconds to spin up the resources and get going, but it succeeded. Here, if there was an error, you would just click that and you would see the error, the details of that. So the job finished, but let's not just take my word for it. Let's go here and write a query in our window here. Once again, we're in the Azure portal. We're at the SQL database itself, and let's just say select star from dbo.person. Get rid of the rest of that. Run it and give it a second. Okay, and then the results come back. So you can see that it copied the data in there. Let's go back to our data factory and go to author. Now, as you can see here, and this is important, we used a wizard, but it actually created a pipeline for us here that we can go in and edit. So let's see what that looks like. So here we have copy data. If we what did that wizard do? What did it set up for us? If we click this box here, copy data, you can see it's got some general information here, but go to our source. It created this source data set that we identified, and then what's called a sink data set. So the source, of course, was our on-prem VM, and then our sink is the data destination that we created for this. So what we can do is even go to open here and take a look, and it's going to show us that. It's going to show us the actual connection. Remember this database, the DBO person. This was the link service we set up. It gives you all this different information, schema, parameters, anything. So that's getting into the details of this box that it set up for us in this wizard. Okay, so the copy wizard set up this pipeline, but let's add some complexity to this. This is just one thing. It's simply copying data from one data source to another. What else can we do to it? So if you open up this little general tab here, you can drag things like store procedure. Say, hey, when this thing completes, call this store procedure, and then you give the store procedure name here. You could also, if you want to do like a serverless function, you've got some .NET code up in Azure, serverless, you can say after that store procedure, then run this. And then when you want to get into like a full-on SSIS type of experience, we can use what's called a data flow. So we drag data flow here, and we're going to run this part of our pipeline here. It's going to say, hey, using an existing data flow, you might have a catalog of ETL packages that you already use, but let's create a new one. So you click that radio button, then you want mapping data flow, not wrangling. That's more like a Power Query in the cloud. We're going to do mapping data flow, and then click OK. So now this brings you to this screen here. This is where we're going to start creating some additional transforms. So click on Add Source. And we're just going to, the first few times it's going to have this wizard that kind of helps you. But we're going to pick that same data set that we on the VM. That's our source. So we've simply created a data source. So now we're pulling data in from a SQL Server. Now what else do we want to do? Well, let's do a derived column. Click the little plus. Then you're going to be presented with this menu of things you can do. Let's click derived column. And in this one, why don't we create a full name? We're going to concatenate first name and last name and call it full name. So here in your expression builder, if we just click this and just drop in concatenate first and last. Of course, you have all these functions here. You have your input schema, so you can see you got your first name and last name here. And we're going to save that and close this. And then you can see we've created a new column called full name, and that's a concatenation of first and last. Let's do a conditional split also. Click this, do conditional split. Now we have a column in there that's called email promotion. We want to send a certain stream of data to people that have email promotion set to 1. But if they're 0, we don't want to send them. We don't want to get in trouble, by sending them emails when they've said to be not contacted or to unsubscribe. So, for example, here, let's click here. Here's a split condition. Let's click in this box here, and we're going to get into our expression builder. And if we click input schema, we're going to see a field called email promotion. So if email promotion, you've got this little help shortcuts down here. We're going to say equals. If that equals 0, then we're going to create a certain stream of data for that. So our stream name, the stream coming out of the flow here for this one is no email promo. Then, of course, on this next one, we could say email promo, and then get in there to our expression builder. And once again, go to input schema and say email promotion equals 1. Save and finish. So now we have our two outputs there. So that's just kind of an overview on how to add some additional conditional logic. And the really kind of exciting thing about this is it's very similar to what SSIS was on-prem, but you can build it with no code or very little code. And what it does in the background is it actually generates Scala or Python code and runs that in typically in a Spark environment in the back end. So it's using very modern data transformation, data science languages behind the scenes on this. So that's a quick overview just to kind of review what we've done at a high level. Pulled in data from a SQL Server on-prem, on a VM, using Data Factory. We dropped that into Azure SQL Database, that's Platform as a Service. We didn't do these other things like cubing it or putting it out to using Power BI, but we did do some simple transformations on it using mapping data flows. So yeah, hopefully this was helpful.